Well, firstly, can I thank Larissa for her welcome to country, and I also recognise Ngunnawal peoples and their elders past and present and their youth, as we should with all youth, who are going to be our future leaders and the custodians of our stories, our cultures, our histories and our languages. And I think it's super important for all of us to recognise, particularly us older folk, to recognise our youth and the contribution that they currently make and will make into the future. And they're the ones who are going to carry forward our culture. And so we should be listening to them now and engaging with our youth and bringing them along with us. My mob are Kungarakan on my mother's side and Lwaidja on my father's side, which is just up there outside of Darwin. Kungarakan country is southwest of Darwin, and Lwaidja is to the northeast of Darwin on the Coburg Peninsula. And I've been very fortunate in being able to grow up still on our country, and also to be able to have a close relationship with many of our elders. Unfortunately, many of them have now passed, and that's a sad indictment, but it's also a recognition that I'm getting old too. So, I guess we'll all be in that situation as we go along. But today's Key Thinker Forum, before I get into the sort of objectives of the forum, I just want to talk a little bit about the Key Thinkers Forums. They've been an opportunity that we created probably around about 2010, and I think this is probably about the 15th Key Thinkers Forum that we've conducted. They started off through the Poach Centre at University of Sydney and the Poach Indigenous Health Centre there, and then it moved over to Macquarie University with the Djurali Centre, and now it's HRI and the team that moved from the Djurali Centre at Macquarie went over to the Health Research Institute, and so we're still keeping them going. I am generally the facilitator of the forums. They've taken many different forms to date, but what we like to describe them is that they're sort of a blend of both the Q&A, as you might see on ABC, or the Insight program on SBS, where questions, you get presenters who'll talk, with some authority on a topic, and then there'll be opportunities for questions from other members of the panel, but also and particularly from the audience. So, heads up, start thinking about the questions, because around about midday, all being well, we'll go into our first of our panel sessions, where the panelists who had spoken prior to that panel session will be there to sort of respond to questions that you might have. It depends on how we're going. There might be, somebody might have a very pressing question post somebody's presentation around clarity of that presentation, and we'll do that, but we don't want to get into too heavy a discussion on the topic at the time. We'd rather wait until we get the panel session together. So that's also your cue to start to take notes. So what we do is we look at what we call a wicked problem. What's an issue out there that is of interest to many people, is of interest to the advancement of an issue if it's not being well considered by governments, and I talk about both the state and territory governments as well as the Commonwealth government. And so it's an opportunity post the forums to knock up a little policy paper, which we will direct towards the relevant government departments to try and influence the way that they're either delivering a program or not delivering it, how we think it might be delivered a little bit better. And so those wicked problems and they're not always wicked because they're not being addressed, but they might be wicked because people just don't give enough emphasis to them. And we believe that there should be more emphasis. So, we start off, we've had, a massive number of different key thinkers forums from, trying to dispel the general population view about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's consumption of alcohol. And so, we talk about the impacts of alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome, spectrum disorder, I should say, and what we believe governments need to do about it. Just issues that a lot of the audience hadn't really appreciated, because part of these forums also give us the opportunity to address our unconscious biases, and we all have them. It's how we might look at an issue and have a certain view about it. Now, that view sometimes is accurate, sometimes it's not so accurate, and so our unconscious bias is about how our understanding of a topic is formulated. Too often, it's out of the media and what the media presents, and when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and particularly Aboriginal people, it's very much from a deficit presentation. It's always, the drunken Aboriginal person in the street. It's all about crime and the crime that Aboriginal people are committing, and so forth. And so we develop a bias, an unconscious bias, and that's particularly the case with the general population, because as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we only represent less than 4% of the population. So a lot of what we do has a direct impact on us, but it also is there to influence the thinking and the attitudes of the general population, and to help inform them. So it's not an adversarial sort of role; it's more an educative role of the sort of work that we do. And as an example, in the alcohol one, what was disclosed and that people just hadn't really understood was that as a population group, we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, on a per head of population, consume less alcohol than the general population, and less of us actually, as a proportion of population, drink alcohol than in the general population. And so, that was a myth that was dispelled, and so that influenced some, particularly those who were interested in learning some more. But it also, just went over the head of others. They just wouldn't believe it, because what they see on TV is, the drunken Aboriginal person out in the street who is, committing some sort of offence, and so that sort of unconscious bias impacts on all of us, and from the police, right through to health providers, and we've got some very significant cases of Aboriginal people who have died in custody or under the care of a health service, because members of the health service had not given the attention to the person that they needed to, because they believed, oh well, they're just a drunk, or they're under the influence of a drug, and so they'll get over it in a short period of time. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and we've seen some very significant and very prominent cases, and the same goes when people are in custodial care. So it's those unconscious biases that we sort of address, and part of this forum today is a good part will be to unpack some of those issues that are around arts and craft, and it's not just a social activity, but there's a bit of meaning to it. But we'll get onto that in a second. But we've looked at things like the nunkery and the role of traditional medicine and support systems versus contemporary medicine. We've looked at breathing through asthma. We've looked at eating disorders, and the list goes on. But they're available. Key Thinkers forums. Just just do a Google search or whatever search engine you use, and look at some of the other topics, and also look at I guess the policy papers that we develop after it, and so that's why it's important that the audience, when they hear presentations, think about the questions and sort of ask the presenters to unpack some of those, some of the issues that you might be concerned about, because that's the only way we learn is if we start to explore, the issues in some depth. But it's an opportunity that not only for those who are going to participate on the forum today, but also, because it's being recorded, there might be opportunities to be able to use it in the classroom, or for others who aren't able to join us today to come on board and understand a little about the topic that we're going to talk about. I've had a long-standing interest in the impacts of art and craft and social activities on the mental health and social and emotional well-being of our people, and it's something that is not given due consideration, in the health sector of these sort of impacts. The irony is that we've been talking about it and actually doing it for quite a long time, and through the arts sector, most artists generally are solo operators. But when you come down to looking at Aboriginal art, and yes, we do have those solo artists, but we also have many group activities, and particularly as we get into the art and craft centres around the nation, particularly in remote communities, we see people working together, and it's just mind-boggling when you see some of the significant pieces of Aboriginal art that exist out there. That one painting, it may be on a some of the big ones, 3 by 5 meters sort of painting, that you'll have multiple artists contributing to it, and it always is just when you're observing this and just the way that art is developed, it's just mind-boggling to think that the artists are all independent, but they're, at the end of the day, they come together, and that's cooperation, and having a common sense and understanding about what's hoped to be achieved. So I've got great admiration for artists and the way they can have conceptual understanding about an end product, even from the time of a blank canvas, and so we're seeing that, but we're also with art. It's really evolving, and and the art and the craft. But I see it so important, for being able to address mental health and social and emotional well-being. But with that, those sort of big art activities in the formal art centres, we're also seeing a lot more activities happening, where we're sharing our skills and our crafts with the general population, trying to make it very inclusive. And you can see it at most of the big events that are held, the Close the Gap Day, the National Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week, where we get a lot of non-Indigenous people participating in activities. You'll often see a weaving or a craft activity taking place. So it's about also sharing our knowledge and our skills with the general population. So it becomes then a reconciliation tool to help people get a bit of understanding. But it's the mental health and social and emotional well-being aspects to it that I think are so important. And that also, not solely, but that also may be a contributing factor, or what we might refer to as a factor that might address one of the stresses or a number of the stresses related to people who self-harm or take their own life. And so culture, we know that culture is one of the protective factors around addressing suicide with Indigenous peoples, not only in Australia but worldwide. So, addressing culture, addressing language, addressing all those aspects of culture, like art and craft, that bring people together. So it's a big effort. What's interesting is that I was the Chancellor of the University of Canberra up until the end of last year, and we'd worked with veterans, military veterans in Australia, service people who had returned through the art sector, and through art and craft, and that art goes from the physical paintings right through to the creative arts in poetry and prose and other issues to address their post-traumatic stress disorder. A very successful program. You might have seen on television very recently that there's been a project called the Pinaroo Project. The community of Pinaroo in South Australia, as a whole community, has just concluded a 3-year project where the community came together to address the mental health, some of the mental health conditions that were being experienced within the community. And what they saw was very tangible outcomes, like a decrease in the number of people who suffered depression within the community, and particularly those who had acute depression, to more socialisation, particularly for farming, males who happen in the rural sector, who happen to be one of the highest, proportion of people who take their own life, in the rural sector. So, it's had a very positive impact. And one of the ironies is, because it's working in the non-Indigenous population, we might get a bit more attention in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sector, even though we've been onto it, for quite some time. But anyhow, I won't bleed on much more, but to say that, we've got a whole cross-section of aspects of art and craft that are going to be explored today through the Key Thinkers Forum. It's not only from practical presentations and demonstrations, as for those that are in situ, can learn some of those skills, but looking at it from a national perspective, the impacts on social emotional well-being, but also looking at it, how it fits within the global movement, and references to how it fits into the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So this is more than just something that impacts on us, although that's primarily most important. But how do we involve youth in this whole process? Issues like decolonisation and resurgence of cultural practice, and how that happens. We'll look at a little bit about that, a bit about the research that's being undertaken to address some of these issues. One of the other ones that I'm very closely associated with is about the consumption of tobacco and vapes by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'm the national coordinator for the Tackling Indigenous Smoking program, which includes vaping now. And so we look at the sort of impacts because, one of the things I'm trying to address is that with social behaviours, smoking it becomes a part of that. It's been a culture that, smoking culture that's been developed, and we've got to address that because, that is not good for people's health. On the one hand, it might be good for socialisation, but on the other hand, it has a very dramatic impact. So we'll explore some of that, I suspect, in the presentations. But overall, I think you'll all find it very interesting in the presentations. Interesting from a national level, but also an international level, and the declaration. Also looking at some of the the international treaties on things like the protection of intellectual property. How do we do that? How do the rights of Indigenous people get protected as communal rights versus individual rights that we enjoy as just human rights? So there's a lot that we will be unpacking throughout the day. I'd really encourage everybody to think about the sort of questions that you might want to ask, to encourage the presenters to be able to stick to time in their presentations, which is going to be very important, and to be able to go through. And I just wanted to recognise in closing off, the work that Kasani's done with John Skinner and Vita Christie in trying to pull this together, and all the other team members who have worked on getting this Key Thinkers Forum together. I had intended to be down there in person, but I've recently been appointed to the Implementation Advisory Committee of the National Accord, the Higher Education and Vocational Education Accord, and we happen to have a meeting tomorrow, which is a must-attend sort of meeting because it's such a big issue. But if you're not across the Accord, being in the university sector, you need to be across it and understand what the key drivers are and what the key aspirations are from the Accord. It's going to have a particular emphasis on equity and how do we engage and encourage and support more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, people from a multicultural background, a called community background, as well as low socioeconomic background to get within the university's sector, but also the relationship between vocational education and higher education, and that's a two-way relationship. The transition from a vet program into a higher education program, but also a higher education program into a vet program so you can get a job. So, and particularly in the rural sector, both those are very important sectors to work on. So that's the sort of work that we'll be doing at the Accord implementation group, and also to develop up the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, which is a first in Australia, but a big challenge on how do we do it and do it so that it works for everybody. So anyhow, that's mine. But I've also got to head off very shortly because I've got a meeting that I can't get out of. It only goes for an hour, and as Kasani flagged, she'll jump into the chair and facilitate in my absence. But as soon as that's over, I'll be back online. So we can take it from there. So anyhow, I will leave it at that. If there are any pressing questions anybody has, want clarification, happy to do so now. Otherwise, I'll leave it in Kasani's capable hands.